The branches don't grow by themselves. The branches grow on the trunk, and the trunk represents our needs. Things like oxygen and water and food and sunlight and warmth and so on, right? What you need is dependent upon what you are. You need what you need because you are what you are. You're a human being, and so you need oxygen. If you were a plant, you would need carbon dioxide. You're a human being, and so you need certain levels of oxygen. If you were an amphibian, you might need other levels of oxygen. If you're a fish, you might need different levels of oxygen. Fish has greater needs for watery environment than you do, and so on, right? So what you are determines what you need, and you can't change what you are, so you can't change what you need. Needs are fixed, they're unchangeable, right? Now, as far as needs are concerned, the thing that you need, now the need of what you need comes from inside, from who you are. But the thing you need, like the oxygen, water, and food, and so on, the thing you need comes from outside of you. So the oxygen that you need to live by is outside of you. But if the oxygen is right outside your nose and your mouth, you can still die because it will never do you any good outside of you. The only way you can live is if you bring it inside of you, if you breathe. Then when it comes inside of you and becomes a part of you, then you can live by it. Same thing is true with water. Water is outside of you, the water that you need, and it must be brought inside of you in order for you to live. If it stays even at your lips, you will die because you can't sustain life by keeping what you need outside of you. It must be brought in order for you to live. Now, the purpose of your behaviors or your actions is to fulfill your needs. You breathe because you need oxygen. You drink because you need water. You eat because you need food, and so on. But there's something about the needs and behaviors that we still need to understand, and that is you need oxygen, but the oxygen doesn't just blow into you. You've got to breathe it. It's your responsibility to bring in what you need. You need water, but it doesn't just flow into you. You've got to drink it. And you must bring it in the quantity and concentration that you need. You need food, but the food doesn't just jump down your throat. You've got to eat it. It's your responsibility. And so everything must first take in what it needs, and it does so then to minister, to give away and minister to the needs of others. For example, what would you be like if you kept everything that you ate from a little baby until now? How huge would you be? Yeah. I mean, do we keep everything? No, we only keep just a very little bit. And the rest of it we pass along. We change its form. Food, broccoli looks like one thing on one end and it looks like something else on the other end. And there are certain things that benefit by that transformation and can live off of what comes out and so on. So everything ministers to the needs of everything else, but it must first take in order to then give. So can you change what you need? The answer is no, you can't, because you can't change what you are. And you cannot change what you are, you cannot change what you need. So your behaviors must be the thing that changes in order to meet your needs. A teeter-totter, it balances, you have the fulcrum and then it balances up and down, up and down, up and down. And the fulcrum is the part that stays still, the part that doesn't move here. Well, the needs are like the fulcrum. It doesn't move, it stays the same. And the behaviors have to then balance one way or another on that in order to meet the needs. And so if your behaviors match your needs, you're going to end up with good fruit and good leaves. But if the behaviors don't match your needs, then you're going to end up with bad fruit and bad leaves. But we're still not at the bottom yet because the trunk doesn't grow by itself. The trunk grows from the roots, and the roots represent our beliefs. And beliefs are not so obvious to us. Sometimes we don't even know what we believe. And it isn't easy to know what others believe. Sometimes you got to dig in order to find out. But what is true of beliefs is that you will always do eventually what you believe, given the opportunity. Given the opportunity, you will do what you believe. So if you don't do what you think you believe, then you must question whether you really believe it or not, because your beliefs lead to your behaviors. So, your beliefs, what if your beliefs match with your needs? Let's say that you believe that you need a sufficient amount of water. Then what are you going to do? Well, you're going to drink a sufficient amount of water. That sufficient amount of water is going to supply your need, and you'll end up with good fruit and good leaves. But if you believe that you need 1 ounce of water a day, then you're going to drink 1 ounce of water a day, but that's not enough to meet your need. And so you're going to end up with bad fruit and bad leaves. Now, if you believe that you need Mountain Dew, well, what are you going to do? You're going to do the dew. You're going to drink Mountain Dew. But do you need Mountain Dew? Well, no, you don't need Mountain Dew. So you're going to supply something that you don't need, and that will eventually end up with bad fruit and bad leaves. So if you have a tree that has bad fruit and bad leaves, what is it that you do to fix the tree? Well, yeah, you can pluck off the bad fruit and bad leaves, but that won't fix it. It just takes away the manifestation. You can trim the tree. That decreases the burden of disease, but still doesn't fix the problem. Well, there's not much to do with the trunk. And I don't know anybody that's done really surgery on the roots. What else do you do? What do? You fix the soil. Right? You fix the soil. Why? Because if the tree is manifesting a problem, the problem's not usually in the tree. The problem is in the soil. And the soil represents our sources. Represents our sources. The tree needs water, but you can have a soil that has too little water. It's dry, and the tree will manifest a problem of bad fruit and bad leaves. You can have soil that's oversaturated with water, and the tree will still manifest the same problem of bad fruit and bad leaves. Or you can have soil that has the wrong stuff in it, like diesel, oil, other things like that. Well, then you're going to end up with bad fruit and bad leaves. Why? Because it's a poison to the tree. You can believe that you need water. You can believe that you need the correct amount of water, and you can drink the correct amount of water to supply and match your needs. But if the water is polluted, you're still going to end up with bad leaves and bad fruit. The only way that you're going to end up with good fruit and good leaves is if you believe correctly about what you need, and the source that you take from is good, and your behaviors supply what you need, then you'll end up with good fruit and good leaves. Right? Well, there's another topic that we need to look at, we need to touch on, and that is this question: is there anyone here that does not need love? Is anyone that does not need love? All right, no. All right, so we all need love. Right? So love is also a need that we have. And remember, everything you need what you need because you are what you are. You're a human being, and so you need love. But everything that you need, just like the oxygen, water, food, and so on, comes from outside of you. So does the love come from inside of you or outside? Well, it comes from outside of you. And everything that you need, there is a behavior to bring it in so that it supplies the need. Again, oxygen, you breathe. Water, you drink. Food, you eat. Love you what? What is the action that brings in love so that it becomes a part of you so that you can live? Because again, it's something that you need. Well, let's imagine that you get a love letter, and the love letter is from the right person, and there's hearts and X's and O's on the front of it, and your name written nicely, and you open it up, and there is there's a letter, and I love you, been thinking about you, can't wait until we get to spend some time together again, and yada yada yada, whatever it is that's in there. And you get done, maybe you had a bad day and you came home, and then you were grumpy, feeling down and all that stuff, and then you get this letter in the mail and you read it. When you get done with it, do you feel loved? Oh, yeah, of course. Right? Of course you do. So from the time before the letter to the time after the letter, you went from unloved to loved, or you went from grumpy to feeling loved. Now, the love came in the meantime, right, while you were reading the letter. But how much love is in ink? Well, none. How much love is in paper? None. How much love is in a stamp? None. Or the ink behind, I mean, the glue behind the stamp? None, right? So where did the love come from, right? There's no love in those substances and those things. Love is a function of, or is brought in by thinking, right? Thinking is the action that brings in love. You had to think about the words that were on that paper. You had to bring the shapes. You learned that this shape means this letter. These combination of letters means this word. These combination of words mean this thought, right? This idea, this concept. These sentences come together and make this paragraph, and all of it comes together. You bring in the information, you think upon it, and once you think upon it and you believe it, it becomes yours. Becomes yours. Right? So thinking is the process or the behavior, the action that brings in the love that you need. So what you believe about love is really important because that will determine how you behave relative to love and whether you're going to take it in the right quantity or not, and from the right source and so on, and whether you'll end up with bad fruit and bad leaves or good fruit and good leaves. Now, what if you believe that other people are the source of the love that you need? What will you do? Well, you will plant your roots in other people and you will seek to take from them the love that they have so that you might be full. You will think that they're your source, you will think upon them, and you will do all of this. And so, in doing so, you'll end up with, well, trouble, 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 trouble. Well, everything we need is determined by law because of who we are. And all things that function are governed by law, and all laws that govern function are unchangeable, like the laws of thermodynamics and the law of gravity and so on and so forth. They are what they are. Our understanding of them might change, but the law itself doesn't change when over time and whatever, it's fixed. And proper function is only maintained by remaining within the law that governs whatever that function is. Once you go outside of the law, then you end up with dysfunction. And when we speak of law, we need to understand that there is a fundamental law of all nature. It's a fundamental law of all nature. And that fundamental law of all nature has two pillars to it, two components, 2 points to it. The first point is that nothing exists from itself. That is, that all things are dependent upon resources and material and power outside of itself for its function or its life. No resources, no power, no materials, no function, no life. Right? And also, the second pillar is that nothing exists for itself. So that means that all things take in those resources, but they do so and give something away to others to support the life or the function or the existence of other things. Everything takes in order to give. Right? Everything takes in order to give. This is just the fundamental law of all nature. All things take in order to give, whether they're alive or whether they're not, even in a not living thing that has some function. That function has to have a taking and it has to have a giving. It's a channel. Right? And from this fundamental law of nature comes things like thermodynamics, the laws of thermodynamics, which tell us that all energy necessary for a system to function must come from outside that system. So that means that the power necessary for this thing to happen must come from outside. And from this fundamental law of nature comes the law of cause and effect that tells us that every effect must have a cause and every cause must produce an effect. Because the effect cannot produce itself, it's dependent upon power, it's dependent upon materials and resources outside of itself. So the cause must be outside of it, which is producing the effect. And this is because everything takes to give. And this is the law of life. The law of life is taking to give. It is the fundamental law of all nature. Everything operates by this law. And it's the name of the book and this series, of course, as well. Now, because everything functions that is regulated by law, and because effect must follow cause and cause must produce an effect, Therefore, any treatment that removes the effect, that plucks off the bad fruit and bad leaves, but does not remove the cause, so the cause still remains, then either that treatment must fail and the cause will continue to produce the same effect. So you might take the pain medication, but you still have pain. Or if the treatment succeeds in taking away the effect and the cause remains, then the cause must produce another effect in order to manifest its presence. So every treatment that does not remove the cause must either fail at accomplishing the removal of the symptoms, or two, it must produce side effects, whatever the treatment may be. Now, let's look at law and function from a different perspective so that we can understand it better. And for this analogy, we're going to look at a road. And the road represents health. And when you're on the road, things function as they're supposed to. You feel comfortable. There's no bad symptoms. And in order to remain on the road, you need certain things like oxygen and water and food and warmth and so on. And you need these things in certain quantities or concentrations or limits. And once you get off the road, whether on one side or the other, you will experience dysfunction and discomfort, both. And the boundary of the road, the edge of the road, the dividing line that determines whether you are on the road or off the road, whether you're in proper function or dysfunction, comfort or discomfort, that line is the law. The law defines where the edge of the road is and what's on the road and what's off. So let's take warmth as our example. Let's say that your temperature goes up and it goes up above the confines of the upper limits of the law that governs your body temperature. Now, how do you feel? Well, you feel hot. Is hot comfortable or uncomfortable? Well, it's uncomfortable. So you have discomfort. You have symptoms, right? And those symptoms are there to let you know that something is wrong, that you are outside of the confines of the law that governs your body temperature. And what do you do when you feel hot? Well, you fan yourself. You take off layers of clothing. You get out of the hot environment into a cooler environment. You drink some cold water. You turn on the air conditioning. You do something in order to decrease your temperature so that you can feel comfortable again. And when your temperature gets back in within the confines of the law that governs your body temperature, then you feel fine. Now, if you continued going and now your temperature went down, 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 and now you got below the lower limit of the body temperature, how are you going to feel? Well, now you're going to feel cold. Is cold comfortable or uncomfortable? Well, it's uncomfortable. It's symptoms, right? You got symptoms again. And those symptoms are there to let you know that something's wrong and that you're outside the confines of the law that governs your body temperature. And what do you do when you feel cold? Well, you cover up with more clothing. You turn the fan off. You get out of the cold environment. You drink some hot tea. You go do something to get your temperature back up. And when your temperature is back up into the confines of the law that governs your body temperature, you're comfortable, you function properly, you don't need to keep warming yourself up anymore. The symptoms are like the rumble strips on the side of the road, right? When you drive off the road and then it goes, or, oh, it's annoying. Well, yeah, it's annoying for a reason. Just like we talked about with the tree and the fire alarm. The fire alarm is there to be annoying to let you know something's wrong. The rumble strips are there to be annoying to let you know there's something's wrong. You're getting off the road. Now, symptoms are not bad. Symptoms are good. Even though we don't like symptoms, the function is good because the function is to let you know that something's wrong so that you can do something about it. But what happens if you don't stop at symptoms? What if you keep going and you go farther? Where do you get to next? Well, you get to disease. Maybe with warmth, now you have heat exhaustion or heat stroke. Not only do you feel bad, but things really are bad. You've got a pounding headache, you got blurry vision, you can't think very correctly. Maybe you got this bellyache and you're vomiting and you're just, oh man, life is just horrible, just horrible. And things are really bad. Why? Because you're really far away from the law. You've gotten really far off the road. And the farther you go, the more dangerous it gets. And the more your alarm system needs to go off in order to get your attention to let you or make you do something desperate in order to get you back. So what do you do now? Well, in addition to, turning the fan on and other things like that, you might actually ask for help. You might submit to help. You might let somebody else help you out of your situation so that in ways that you couldn't help yourself anymore. Or you might allow yourself to be submitted to some drastic treatments, like somebody pouring ice water all over you to try to cool you down quickly in order to get your temperature back. You would submit to those things. Why? Because it feels really bad and you don't like feeling really bad. In order that you might get back so that you don't feel really bad anymore. And the same thing happens on the other side as well. If your temperature keeps going down, then you end up with more disease. On the opposite side, chilblains, frostbite, other things like that, very damaging. If it doesn't turn around right away, you're going to start losing things. There's very significant dysfunction. And so you got to do something about it right now. And it's quite painful, uncomfortable to motivate you to do something now to get back into the confines of the law that governs your function, right? So I'm there's a problem with symptom care. And one of the problems with symptom care is, well, the big problem really is with chronic symptom care. Mind you, acute care, meaning short-term care, with pain control or just symptom control is I think okay. I'm very happy that there are hospital systems to take care of emergencies and accidents and traumas and surgeries and other things of this nature if it's needed, and intensive care units and so on and so forth. I'm very happy for those. My background is emergency medicine. And I served as one of those ER docs and traumas, taking care of traumas and all that kind of stuff. And if somebody cuts off their finger, or if I cut off my finger, well, I'd be very happy to have something to blunt the pain, right? I know that there's a problem, but my finger's cut off, and I want some some help with pain control right now. But what happens if short-term pain control becomes long-term pain control? There becomes a problem. And why? What's the problem? Let's say that our chronic symptom that we're going to be taking care of is pain. And what we're going to do for it is we're going to take some pain medication. So notice here the road, pay attention to the road and how wide the road is and the edge of the law here. When I start taking the pain medication, the road starts looking like this. All right, I'm going to go back. All right, now this is off pain medication. This is on pain medication. This is off pain medication. This is on pain medication. You notice something happening here? The law is still here. The law still defines where the edge of the road is. But when I take the pain medication, to me, it looks like the road is wider. So I can start driving off the edge of the road, thinking that I'm still on the road, because now I'm taking something that blunts my perception of where the edge of the road is. And the more and the stronger the pain medication that I take, the wider the road appears to be, the more likely I am to drive off the road and to get farther off the road without having any alert signals that I'm off the road. Chronic symptom care blunts your perception so that you don't know the dividing line between when you're inside the law and outside the law. And it takes away the motivation that you have to find the cause and to do something about it. That's why chronic symptom care is dangerous. It's dangerous. Right. So what happens if you don't stop at disease and symptoms? What if you keep going? Where are you going to end up? Well, eventually you're going to end up at death. You're going to die. The further you get from the law, the more dysfunction there is until you come to the point of no function on either side. The result is the same whether you go one way or the other. And on a physical level, there's this point that you can come to before death, and it's called the point of no return. There's a place where you get to where you've gone so far away from the law that you're not getting back. You're not getting back. Now, there's no point of no return as far as God is concerned. He brought Lazarus back after 4 days of death. I mean, come on, he can There's no point of no return as far as God is concerned, but from a human standpoint, there is. And from a physician standpoint, dealing with individuals, there is. There's a place where you can lose. You're still alive, but you lost so much blood, you're just not getting back. You're alive, but you've had so much trauma, there's no way to recover from it. You're far enough along in the cancer process that you're just not getting back unless there's some kind of miracle that happens. So there's something else, remember, that you need besides oxygen, water, food, and warmth in order to live and to function. And that is love. We need love, just like we need the other physical things. And is it possible that there's a law that governs the function of love? And as long as we stay within the confines of that law, we can have proper function, health, comfort, and so on. But once we go outside of the law that governs that function of love, then we end up with symptoms, disease, and death. Interesting thought. So health is proper function, which is the effect of staying within the law. Disease is dysfunction, which is the effect of going outside of the law. And symptoms and disease are like the fire alarm and the rumble strips. They're good. They're good. They warn you that something is wrong and you need to do something about it. They're there to motivate you to change. Symptoms and disease are good. They're not bad. They're there to help you, not to harm you. The thing that results in the symptoms and disease, the thing that's causing it, that's the problem. That's the culprit. Now, let's consider a little closer the law of cause and effect. The law of cause and effect shows us that every effect must have a cause, and every cause must produce an effect. And if the effect is present, that means that the cause is also present, because if the cause is removed, well, the effect has to go away because it's not producing itself, can't produce itself. No effect can produce itself because it depends upon power and materials outside of itself even to exist and to function. So you will never find an effect without a cause. According to the law of cause and effect, you will never find an effect without a cause. That means, and pay attention to this is important, that means there is no such thing as chance. There's no such thing as chance. Chance is a deception. There is nothing that is truly random. Everything has cause and effect. Cause and effect. The Bible supports that. Proverbs 26:2, the curse causeless shall not come. You will never have an effect without a cause. Never, right? And we're told that in the laws of God and nature, effect follows cause with unerring certainty. And the will of God establishes the connection between cause and its effects. There's always cause and effect. Now, when we consider the road and we consider getting off the road and getting outside the law or breaking the law and then having symptoms and disease, let's ask the question, what is the breaking of the law called? Well, the breaking of the law, what law? Well, breaking the law, we understand that one of the terms for it is sin. And when we consider sin, which law do we consider as broken? Well, it's God's law, right? And what is the foundation of God's law? Well, it's his character, it's love. Right? So the foundation of God's law of love is love, and God's law is really about love. So disease, therefore, is the result of a love problem, and that is called sin. Disease is the result of a love problem, which is called sin. We're told there is a divinely appointed connection between sin and disease. No physician can practice for a month without seeing this illustrated. If he will be observing and honest, he cannot help acknowledging that sin and disease bear to each other the relationship of cause and effect. It's true. It's true. We are not taught in medical school how to reason from cause to effect. In a cursory way, we are told that there is cause and effect, but we aren't told exactly what cause effect is, because we're also told that there's chance. There are things that are random. There's things that happen without having a cause and that are unexplainable, and so on and so forth. And so we have this kind of mixture of hocus pocus. We have a little bit of the truth, but we don't really believe the truth. And then we mix in all this other stuff along with it, and that's medical school education. And I went into medical school. My father told me, you're going to have to unlearn 50% of what you learn. And when I was going through medical school, one of our professors said, well, about half of what we're teaching you is wrong, but we don't know which half that is. they, were, they were upfront about it, but I have come to discover it's far more than half of what they were teaching me was wrong. The foundational understandings of it was wrong. So it's taken me a while to learn, to relearn, to unlearn many of these different things. So let's take a look at things from another perspective. Again, we're going to look at it from a cellular standpoint. You and I are made up of 50 to 100 trillion cells. We have over 250 different types of cells, and each cell has particular functions. Each cell is like a factory, and factories, of course, produce products. And your body's functions are dependent upon the individual functions of your cells. And if you lose one type of cell, you lose the function specific to that type of cell, or functions specific to that type of cell. For example, if you have type 1 diabetes, you'll lose your beta islet cells in your pancreas, and the beta islet cells are the only cells in the body that produce insulin. So now your body has no capacity to produce insulin because the cells that produce insulin are gone. And these beta islet cells, you need the insulin in order to bring the sugar from the bloodstream into the cells so that the cells can use the sugar and live by it. So if you don't have that insulin, in essence, you block the cells from being able to use the sugar that's there, so they don't have fuel anymore to function and they die. And your blood sugar levels go up and up and up in the process. So it's not a good thing. Now, if you have a cause in place, it immediately begins to produce an effect. But it might take time for the effect to become large enough for you to notice it. So let's imagine that you have 20 billion beta islet cells. I don't know how many you have. This is just an imaginary thought process, right? We're going to thought experiment. So let's imagine that you have 20 billion beta islet cells. And now the cause for type 1 diabetes comes in, an autoimmune condition, and your immune system starts killing off 100 beta islet cells every second. So you lose 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, and so on, right? So you go through this process, you lose these cells, and you're doing so at that rate. You're going to end up with losing 6,000 cells a minute, 360,000 an hour, 8.6 million in a day, 60.5 million in a week, 260 million in a month, and 3.2 billion cells every year. But you usually don't develop symptoms of a particular disease or deficiency or loss of a particular cellular population until you've lost about half of the cells that you have that particular function. So in this case, you would need to lose 10 billion cells before you started manifesting noticeable problems with diabetes. And at the rate of 100 cells per second, that would take you 3 years and 2 months before you lost half of your beta islet cells and started developing symptoms. So even though you started noticing symptoms today, the cause was actually in place for over 3 years. And some disease processes are faster, others are slower. Some come about in a matter of seconds, minutes, or hours between the beginning of the cause and when the effect is noticed. But other processes may take years or even decades before you develop symptoms that are great enough for you to notice them. But what is always true and must always be true is that the cause must be in place before the effect is noticed. That the cause must be in place before the effect is noticed. Because if the effect is present And also we must know that if the effect is present, the cause is also present. Because if the cause is removed, the effect must begin to go away. So again, this is another really important point. So I want to get your attention back. If we've been zoning out, let's bring your attention back. If you want to know the cause of your disease or your condition or whatever it is, the cause has to meet this criteria. One, the cause must be in place before your very first symptom with whatever the thing is. And number two, the cause must still be there as long as the process of disease is continuing in process, right? So as long as the disease process continues, the cause must still be there. So the cause had to be there before the first symptom. And if the disease process continues, then the thing causing the process must still be there. So the cause must meet those criteria. So if it's something that came in your life after the first symptom, it's not the cause. And if it's something that was there but went away, but you still have the problem, that's not the cause either. It's got to be something that was there before and something that's still there now. So that's what you're looking for as far as a cause. Now, cells, they function by law, that unchangeable law of nature, the fundamental law of nature, the law of life, taking to give. And that law shows us that cells are dependent upon power and resources outside of themselves in order to function. Just like any engine, living systems must have fuel to operate and something to ignite that fuel. And the law of life shows us that it is the cell's own responsibility to take in those things that it needs for the purpose of giving or ministering to others by the manufacture and release of its products, hormones, insulin, glucagon, autocrines, paracrines, cell signaling molecules, all sorts of stuff that gets produced. The fuel or the raw materials for the cells include your oxygen, your water, your nutrients. These are all chemicals. And if the raw materials that the cells use are chemicals, then the products that the cells produce are chemicals as well. So the cells are chemical factories. They take in chemicals in one form and they spit them out in another form. Again, everything the cell needs must come from outside of itself and it must be brought into the body through an organ or an organ system. So oxygen comes into the body by the action of breathing, and it comes into the body through the respiratory tract or the lungs. And once in the lungs, the oxygen must be brought into the body so that it can get to every cell of the body, because every cell of the body needs oxygen to live. And what is the vehicle that carries the oxygen to every cell of the body? It's the blood. The blood carries all the raw materials, all the fuel to every cell of the body. And of course, this is why the Bible emphasizes in Leviticus 17:11, for the life of the flesh is in the blood. It's because the blood is responsible for bringing in all of the resources, all the fuel that the cells need in order to function. And if you starve the cells from that fuel by blocking off the blood flow or having poor circulation, then you cause dysfunction or death in those cells. But do you know why the cells die? If they're starved of the resources that they need, it's because their purpose is to give, but they must take in order to give. And if they're deprived of the raw materials or the fuel, they will continue to give until they run out of resources. In other words, they will give until they die. They can't stop giving. Just like their creator, by the way. So the oxygen or any chemicals that your cells need must be available to the cells in certain concentrations or quantities. And as long as the concentration or the quantity is good, the cells will be able to extract what they need. But if there's too little or there's too much, there's going to be dysfunction. And not only do the cells need resources or chemicals or fuel, the cells also need energy or power. And the cells function as electrical units. They regulate the concentration of positively and negatively charged particles inside the cell. That results in voltage and current and resistance, all of which are electrical properties. And what is it that coordinates the function of every cell in the body? It's the nervous system. Every function in the body is ultimately regulated by and coordinated through the nervous system. And what is the pathway that allows the nervous system to control and coordinate all of the other systems? Part of it is the nerves, right? Communicating the commands of the nervous system to the cells of the body, but also the endocrine system through the nerves, then to the endocrine system and their production of hormones. But the law of life shows us that the nervous system itself is dependent upon power and fuel outside of itself in order to function. The fuel comes through the blood, but where does the power or the spark come from? It must come from outside the nervous system. And I will tell you, it comes from spiritual information. It comes from spiritual information. You see, the cells are dependent upon physical components, but we aren't just physical. There's a spiritual dimension that's not well understood. And just as there's an organ or organ system to bring in every physical thing we need, the lungs for oxygen, the digestive tract for food and water, the skin for sunlight and warmth, right? There's also an organ that brings in the spiritual information, but that organ must be spiritual. And it is our spirit, right? It's your spirit. In the Bible, tells us in Genesis 2 and verse 7, the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. So God took dust, added to it the breath of life, and there he had a living being. And the dust became the body, the breath of life became the spirit, and the living being is a soul. Right? A combination of the two just made the soul. And the functions of the soul are dependent upon each of its two parts. And it can have no function without both parts. Software cannot function without hardware, and hardware cannot function without software. Separate the spirit from the body, there's no function of either. When the software is combined with the hardware, then you have a functional computer, right? Each remain what they are. The software remains the software, hardware remains the hardware when they're brought together, and each have their individual components of the function, but they only have function when they're together. So it is with the soul, the body and the spirit, which comprise the soul. Only the soul has function. The spirit doesn't have function. The body doesn't have function. Only when the two are brought together do they. But the body, it does not control the function. It's the spirit that controls the function, just like it's the software that controls the function of the hardware. The hardware doesn't control the software. The hardware just, what should I say, provides the opportunity for the software to manifest, right? To manifest and to function. So the control comes from the software, the spirit, and the hardware of the body responds to it. So we find a wonderful thing in the body. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created him. So you and I are created in God's image. And in creation, which comes first? That which is physical or that which is spiritual? Well, who created? Well, God did. And what did he do to create? Well, we're told that God spoke and it was. God said, let there be light, and there was light. God said, let there be a firmament, and there was a firmament. God said, let there be land, and there was land, and so on. Jesus said in John 6:63, he said, the words that I speak to you, they are spirit and they are life. So, and we know in John 1, in the very first chapter, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And we're told that word, through him, all things were created that were created. Nothing, without him, nothing was made that was made. So it was Jesus that spoke everything into existence. And he said, the words that I speak to you are spirit and they are life. So Jesus, God the Son, spoke and it was. His words are spirit. And in John 4:24, we're told that God is spirit. So spirit spoke, which is spirit. And from that came everything that is physical. So from the spiritual comes everything that is physical. So we are created in God's image, and in us, the spiritual is first, which then impacts the physical. Right. And, we've been led to believe that brains think and without a spirit, but that's not true. this idea comes from evolutionary theory, from modern science. It would tell us that brains can think, that matter can regulate itself. Matter is self-existent, the Big Bang. Matter is self-sustaining. It can keep itself up and keep itself going. Matter can organize itself into complex systems and come together and organize and so on. And matter can create life through that complexity. Once it organizes and gets organized enough, then it has life. And matter can regulate itself. It can give itself commands and mutate itself and destroy itself and so on and so forth. And matter then can become conscious and can think and feel and have spiritual capacities. And of course, the more complicated the system, the more complex the spiritual capacities. In evolutionary scientific thought, spiritual capacities are the effect, physical nature is the cause. In the biblical standpoint, we see that it's completely opposite. It's the spiritual things that are the cause. The body is simply manifesting the effect. So as a result of scientific and evolutionary theory, we believe that the brain is conscious and can think and feel. We believe that bacteria and viruses can mutate themselves. We believe that cells can program themselves to die. All of these things we believe because of evolutionary theory, but it's not true. According to the law of life, cannot be. It is the spirit that brings these capacities to the brain. Spiritual information, that which we believe to be the truth, is taken in by the spirit. Then the power is made available to the cortex of the brain, and the brain takes in that power. It generates an electrical impulse in the cortex. That electrical impulse is conducted through the nervous system to the different parts of the body, which generates chemicals that the cells take in. And when the cells take in those chemicals, it changes how they function. The combination of the spirit and the body constitutes the soul, and it's the soul that thinks. You've got to have the hardware. And if you mess up the hardware by putting a bullet through it, it's not going to work so well. And you've got to have the spirit as well. You separate them, you've got nothing. You've got no function, no thought whatsoever. And again, we're told that we are created in God's image. In the image of God, He created him, male and female, He created him. So God created us in His own image. So He created us to think like He thinks. And God is the author of all truth. So the foundation of the spiritual information that we need is truth. And when truth is the foundation of the spiritual information that our spirit takes in, it provides the correct control of the cells of the body so that they function properly. But when the foundation of the spiritual information that our spirit takes in is something different than love, if it's lies and error, then when the spirit takes that in by believing and trusting that information that it's true, it makes a different power available to the nervous system, which then takes in that power and generates a different electrical current, which is then transmitted down the nerves to the specific cells of the body that are connected to that place in the cortex of the brain where the power came in from the spirit. And the effect is dysfunction in the cells, or the cells regulated, or cells that are regulated through the nerve, or those nerves that supply that area. And this spiritual dimension of cellular dysfunction is a major reason why cells dysfunction and why we end up with disease. Now that we have a basic understanding of the structure and function of cells, let's look at different types of dysfunction. First, we look at inheritance. Inheritance, you and I, we have blueprints that are used in forming us. And the blueprints is found in the form of DNA, your genetic material. And of course, you get a copy from mom and a copy from dad, and it comes together with sperm and egg and comes together into a single cell. And from that single cell, you have 2 and then 4 and 8 and so on and so forth. And every cell of the body has the same blueprints, the same DNA. Now, depending on the type of cell will depend on which components, which genes are necessary to be used in order to form that particular type of cell so that it can have the particular functions that it needs. Not all cells require all of the different genes. Certain cells require certain genes so that it can have a certain form and certain function. Other cells will have other genes that gives a different form and a different function, right? Different blueprints for different structures. Well, what happens if the DNA is messed up? Well, if the DNA is messed up in a prior generation, then every single one of your cells will have that dysfunctional DNA. It'll have that dysfunctional blueprint. And if it's a dysfunction caused by inheritance, it must manifest in every cell that uses that dysfunctional gene. Right? It must manifest in every cell that uses that dysfunctional gene. So every cell of a particular type will be affected. If you have a situation where you have some affected here, some affected there, a patch there, and a patch there, and so on and so forth, it cannot be inheritance because it doesn't fit the pattern. It's got to be something else. Now, another cause for dysfunction is environment. You can have temperature, pressure, cells function within a certain temperature and pressure. And if the temperature goes too high or too low, you damage the cells. If the pressure gets too high or too low, you damage the cells. They can't function. And so if you take the hammer and instead of hitting the nail, you hit your finger, well, then you can have some real dysfunction that's there. But environment can be very localized. You can bang one finger and have problem in one finger, and all the other fingers are fine. Right? So you can have localized dysfunction with environment. You can burn your pinky, and all of your other fingers are fine. So you can have localized dysfunction with environment, but you can't really have a localized dysfunction with inheritance, except if all of the cells of a particular type are localized in a particular area, like the thyroid. Right? Yes, you can have thyroid problems that are an inheritance cause, but if so, it must manifest in all of the cells of the thyroid of the same type, not just spots here and spots there. Right? A third cause for dysfunction is raw materials. Right? We must have, the cells must have the raw materials in a certain quantity or concentration in order to be able to extract it well. And so if you have too little, you end up with deficiencies. If you have too much, then you have toxicities. And if you have poisons, then poisons can cause problems as well. Now, poisons never begin a new process. Poisons enter in and stop an existing process from happening. So you have an existing process or an existing function, poisons or envenomations or toxins or other things enter into there to stop that process from happening. Poisons do not start a new process. Right? So if you have something that's a new process that's beginning, it cannot be raw materials. It's not environment either. And it's not going to be inheritance unless it begins in every cell of a particular type. Now, here you have a situation where somebody has gout, gouty arthritis. We know that gout is associated with uric acid, and you have high uric acid levels. You have a concentration of it here in the joint. It crystallizes, it forms uric acid crystals. There's inflammation and pain and swelling. It's very painful. And of course, if you use medication to decrease uric acid levels, the gout goes away and you fix the problem. So obviously, it's uric acid that's the cause. Well, here's a cholesterol plaque in an artery. And we know that the cholesterol plaque is formed with cholesterol. And so obviously cholesterol is the problem and it accumulates there because of excess cholesterol levels. And we know that cancers like a breast cancer are related to animal protein consumption. And so high fat diets and processed red meats and hormone exposure and so on and so forth. And so you have these chemicals flowing through the body and then you can then develop a cancer in that area. So of course the cause is those bad chemicals. But are those really the causes? And can they be really the causes? Well, the answer is no. Why? Because of diffusion. Diffusion, you have a substance that gets into a watery environment, and what happens is it eventually gets out and spreads into an even concentration throughout the environment, especially when you stir it up. Well, the bloodstream is a watery environment and it's stirred up like crazy. And so if you have any chemical or any substance that gets into the bloodstream, it's going to get mixed up very quickly and it will have the same concentration essentially throughout all of the bloodstream. So if you have somebody that has gout and you've got gout in the left toe and you want to know if the uric acid levels are elevated, then you don't have to go to the lab and have them draw blood out of your toe. You can have them draw blood out of your hand. And they know that the uric acid levels that they get from the hand or from your arm is the same as what's going down in the toe because the uric acid levels are the same throughout the bloodstream. Now, if that's the case, which it is, then you have the same uric acid levels going to your left foot as to your right foot. So why do you end up with a problem in the left foot? Can it just be the uric acid? Can the uric acid gather itself together, have a party, and say, hey, let's all meet over here, concentrate, and form a crystal? No, material can't do that. Matter cannot do that. Something has to do it to the matter. The matter can't do it itself. Same thing with the cholesterol. Your cholesterol concentration is the same over here after the plaque as it is before the plaque, which is the same at the plaque. So how come you have the plaque developing? If it was just because of the cholesterol and cholesterol concentration, you should see something like this, where you have a relatively even distribution of cholesterol throughout the arteries, but that's not what you see. You see a plaque developing here, and it's relatively clean over here. So and the cholesterol cannot concentrate itself. It doesn't have the capacity to do so. Matter cannot do that. That's an evolutionary theory that matter can organize itself or collect itself. It cannot do that. Something has to do the organizing and the collecting. And the same is true with the animal protein. Why do you end up with breast cancer on the left side and not the right side? Well, your animal protein concentration was the same in the left chest and the right chest. So why did it start over here? There's got to be something else. Got to be something else. The fourth cause of dysfunction that we're going to consider is energy. And by energy, I'm referring to the energy brought in through the spirit to the nervous system, which then regulates and coordinates the function of the cells of the body. And that energy is the prominent cause of dysfunction, accounting for about 90% of all dysfunction and disease in the body. The dysfunction that results from energy can be localized or generalized depending upon what part of the cortex or the brain is affected by the spirit. A rough, poor analogy, but it's a poor analogy, but a rough analogy is that the brain is kind of like a piano and the spirit is kind of like the piano player. Now, again, the spirit has no function outside of the brain. The brain has no function outside of the spirit. They only have a function when they come together, right? So I don't want to get the idea that the spirit is a different entity that's playing the body. No, they're together in a single functional unit. But again, just for analogy standpoint, the brain is kind of like the piano and the spirit is kind of like the piano player. And the piano player can choose which keys to play. Well, the spirit has billions of keys to choose from in the brain to play. And what keys, what neurons that it plays, right, where that energy comes in will determine where in the body that ends up, because the nervous system is regulated very closely, very succinctly, so that it has certain spots and certain locations that it goes to. So why do you end up with a problem in this toe and this joint? Well, you have a nerve that goes to that toe joint with a nerve ending that can send a signal down from the nervous system that then communicates to the immune system. Every time you have an inflammation, that's a product of the immune system. So if you have inflammation, the immune system is involved. And yes, the immune system has living cells, and those living cells can accumulate the uric acid, form it to cause it to accumulate, and then you can have uric acid crystals and you can have inflammation and pain. You've got a nerve ending that goes to this section of the artery that doesn't go over here and over here. So you can have a signal that's sent down the nerve to this area that causes accumulation of, through the immune system, again, accumulation of cholesterol and the formation of a plaque. And you have a nerve that's going to the center of the tumor that can then that can then be involved in the process of cancer transformation and metastasis and all of that stuff. And there are plenty of studies that show that the nervous system has a strong part to play in the development of cancer. And in fact, in my experience, most individuals that come down with cancer have done so within a year or a few years of a major loss or a major trauma in their life. And that comes through here. It comes through here. So every effect must have a cause, and every cause produces an effect. And all energy necessary for a system to function must come from outside that system. That means the cause can never be found where the effect is. The cause is never found where the effect is because the cause had to come from outside. Had to come from outside of the effect. Right? And sorry, went the wrong way. And the fifth and final cause of dysfunction is the enemy. All right, there are physical dysfunctions that can be caused by the enemy. Satan, he's not covered under the last four. You have the example of Job. He was covered with boils from the head of his, top of his head to the bottom of his feet. Painful. We would probably culture it today and see what bacteria growing out of it, but that's, it wasn't that wasn't the cause. The cause was the enemy. It wasn't his thinking. It wasn't the raw materials that he was consuming. It wasn't the environment that he was. It wasn't an inheritance condition or anything like that. The enemy was permitted to do this for a purpose. And once the purpose was completed, then the thing went away. So when you're considering the cause of disease, you've got to look through these various different things. Is it inheritance? If so, it must manifest in every cell of a particular type. Is it environment? Okay, it's burning, freezing, smashing, cutting, something of that nature. Is it raw materials? Whoops. If it is, well, then it cannot accumulate itself, and it must evenly deposit amongst other things. So it can't cause specific problems here, there, or there. Is it energy? That can cause specific problems in particular locations, and it can be very specific, or it can be more generalized depending upon where the energy comes in, or the power comes in through the nervous system and its control of the cells. And then finally, there can be the enemy. So that's what we're looking at for today, looking at the various different causes of disease. Tomorrow evening, we're going to get in deeper. We're going to wade in a lot deeper and seek to understand some more things about ourselves and start to understand how our thinking can be a bit turned upside down so that we can think we're doing things right, but we're not doing things right. And then we have manifestations of things not going right. And then we're just going to keep getting deeper from there because we need to understand why we function, why we dysfunction, so that we can understand how to cooperate in the process of restoring function. Right? And again, some of you are going to get free books. So, invite your friends and family to come join us tomorrow and through the weekend so that we can learn so much more, so we can understand why we function, why we dysfunction, and what's going on. I'm going to turn things back over to Bonnie.
Thank you, Dr. Sandoval. That was